So for 4 decades, David Collins has shaped atmospheres from around the world, from grand European cafes to destination hotel bars and designer stores. The studio has long understood that beautiful design is not only seen but felt, and creating atmospheres at the centre of that has always been light. From how it creates mood, it can guide people and turn a room into a real experience. And I think David Collins is one of those studios that really caught on to lighting design early on compared to some of the others. And you've been here for 40 years, and lighting...
20 years.
Oh no, the studios.
That's always a bit me, 40 years.
Get onto that. So 40 years in the studio, and over those 40 years, lighting has changed dramatically from tungsten bulbs, LED, of course we have decorative fittings, and now we have complex lighting control systems. It's no longer just a function or a finishing touch, it's something that is thought out from the very beginning. So to talk about the evolution of David Collins alongside how you've evolved with light is design director Lewis Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So Lewis is one of the key creative voices at David Collins. You joined in 2006?
Yeah, so I've been here 20 years now, which, seeing that it's half of the 40 years the studio's been around, feels quite, quite a long time actually. Yeah. It's the first ever job I had, and I've been here ever since.
So you come from a furniture background, right, in product design. So tell us what it was like when you first started working here.
So I joined the studio as a furniture designer on the residential projects. So I trained as a furniture designer, and then brought on board, started doing just the custom furniture and lighting for all of the projects, which was a nice, a mix of residential, retail and hospitality projects. And then over the years, as I gathered more experience, David started giving me my own projects to run, and I've kind of grown into the studio ever since.
Cool. So coming from a furniture background, lighting must have been something really new to you. So what sort of knowledge did you have about lighting before?
So I think I had quite a good understanding on my degree courses. We looked at lighting, designed lights and things like that. So there's a lot of commonalities between furniture design and lighting design in terms of like really looking at the minutiae and how those materials fit together, what the quality of the light is that's going to come out of the piece. And I think looking at those details in such a micro sense then really naturally transferred into kind of the macro sense. We've taken that, that kind of idea of looking at the details and the marriage of materials and kind of blowing that up into a bigger scale. The first couple of years in the studio, it was really nice to be able to concentrate on just the smaller elements, but then naturally I started wanting to kind of bring that into the full interior space. But yeah, that kind of married, that kind of how we approach furniture design and lighting design, it's naturally how we approach the projects as well, looking at colour, texture, detail, all of that. So it's transitions across all the elements of our projects.
So what was the approach to lighting like when you first joined, and if you think about compared to now?
I think before I joined, I thought that was an element that layered on the project afterwards, when actually I think from when I first started doing the entire projects and up until now, it's something that we think about right at the conceptual stage of the project. It's not layered on afterwards, integrated into the design thought from the very get-go. It's, the first thing we think about a project is how it feels when you enter the space, how it feels when you move around the space, when you've sat there as a guest, if it's a restaurant, and whether that be about materials or details, colour, lighting, all of those kind of play a part in how that space is going to feel. So, we're thinking about lighting very, very early on in the process, the same way that we're thinking about the colour, the furniture, the fabrics, and everything all together. So it's a really holistic design approach, which is sometimes very difficult because rather than just thinking about how the restaurant's going to look, at the very start of the project, you're actually thinking about 1,000 different things all together. And so we think about that very early on. Same way that we think about art, we want to integrate that into our projects rather than just layer it on afterwards. And so lighting is very similar to that.
Cool. When you joined, was it something that drew you to David Collins? Was it like a dream job, or stumbled across it?
I slightly stumbled across it, I'll be quite honest. I mean, I was doing my final year show, And a gentleman from the studio gave me his business card because I was showing a collection of three tables. He gave me his business card. I told a bit of a lie and rang him the next day and said, I'm in London tomorrow, shall I come for an interview? And he was like, oh, okay. And he said yes, obviously. And then I had 24 hours to get a portfolio together because I didn't have a portfolio, and I got the train down to London, came in, and then had the job the next day. And then I think that was on the Wednesday and started on the following Monday. So it was quite quick, but obviously within that time I'd researched the studio and realised, well, what an amazing opportunity to work with some amazing projects, and so I was very lucky to slightly stumble upon it. I remember for the interview process I had to pick 3 images that I thought were appropriate for the studio, which furniture and lighting pieces. So I picked a detail of the junction of the Barcelona chair, Jean-Michel Franck piece, and I think it was the Charlotte Perriand light. Lucky one of those was one of David Collins' favourite piece. So therefore, instantly that was kind of a little bit of luck as well. Yeah. And so we struck up a good rapport, and then that's how the story started. Yeah.
God, you must be a really confident individual.
Not at all. Yeah, I think I was quite lucky to. When you're talking about your designs, you have to be so confident in them. I think that's one of the most difficult things. Like, if you are confident in your design, the final concept presentation is easy. Mm-hmm. When you're not 100% confident in it, that's when it becomes a bit more difficult. But yeah, imposter syndrome still now.
Yeah. So can you remember any of the early projects that you worked on, and do you remember what you learnt about creating atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of my first projects were things like Limewood Spa, Connaught Bar, the Wolseley private dining room. So yeah, it was quite a steep learning curve in terms of managing projects of those different scales as well, and how we approached light, working with a specialist lighting consultant as well, and how we coordinate together, as providing the general mood of how we want the project to feel, and then them kind of adding in that more technical ability, and then collaborating together to make the scheme work. That was something that I learned quite quickly. I remember back when we first started those projects, it was coming to the end of incandescent bulbs and things like that, so we were shipping bulbs from Europe across the projects here and things like that, making sure that we could get the right quality of light for those projects as well. LEDs being in their infancy there, and super white, and not anything that we wanted in our projects. We were trying to replicate candlelight everywhere, and we were miles off that at that point in time. So we worked really hard to make sure that we could maintain kind of that warm kind of amber glow of our projects. So I remember that being a bit of an issue in those first few years.
Yeah, well, that's a great segue into the next part of our interview, because I'd like to go through a couple of those projects. Yeah. Talk about the lighting, different approaches that you've learnt along the way, and you mentioned Connaught Bar, which is one of the most famous bars in the world thanks to its design, and it's a great example of layered lighting as well. So can you tell us what the David Collins approach is for that perfect glow?
As I said, we're always trying to kind of replicate candlelight. Yeah. It's the most complementary if you're in the space. It really sets the mood. So, and luckily enough, in a lot of projects, we're able to use candlelight. But with all of the projects, it's about the levels of lighting in terms of we're looking at lighting on the tables, which is going to face, it's going to make you feel more glamorous when you're in the space, it's going to make you feel good. There's kind of almost an eye level height, which becomes a kind of decorative light around the room, like wall sconces and things like that. And then there's a ceiling light, which is going to be used, mainly in restaurants to spot the tables. We don't want anyone getting their phone torches out as they're trying to read a menu. And using that very sparingly on the architecture, to create drama in the architecture rather than create too much ambient light levels. So we always look at those kind of 3 light levels and make sure that we're incorporating those into each of our projects. We also look at the lighting levels in terms of brightness and how we may change those during the day. A lot of our spaces operate for breakfast, lunch and dinner, so there's different lighting levels and lighting moods that we want to create during the life of the project during the day.
You said about getting phones out for torch, but people often get their phones out for socials always. Is this something that clients bring up in briefers, like you want Instagrammable?
Yeah, there's more and more recently, there's what's the Instagram moment, what's the memorable moment? It is, it gets a little bit tiring. I mean, we approach it in a very different way. We aren't going to create, a unique backdrop just for the sense of Instagram, but we might, for Nobu Portman Square, for instance, we used a really signature green timber veneer on the tables. So if people are taking pictures of the plates of food, you know, the background becomes memorable, people know it's Nobu, and therefore, you know, that gives an identity from socials as well, rather than just, you know, the signature bathrooms that usually is these days.
Cool, so may as well move on and talk about Nobu, because that is quite different from David Collins' usual hospitality sort of styles. It's like quieter, softer, minimalistic. Did that change your thoughts about light?
Yeah, I mean, with Nobu as a brand, and obviously their heritage, we wanted to very carefully and sensitively refer to that, but without making anything that was pastiche or, you know, potentially offensive, you know, to them. So we very carefully looked at, rather than, you know, recreating Japanese design, we looked at like the Japanese sensibility and how they approach design. So, you know, much more considered, a little bit more minimal. Most of our projects are known for being very layered and quite luxurious. This was a little bit more pared back, but still had our signature approach, again, of like colour, material, detail, colour, texture and detail, but used in different ways. Like timber panels had cutouts in them that then were backlit and had, you know, deep orange silk wallpaper behind. So we gave it that colour and warmth, but in a much more kind of minimal and quieter approach. So that was something that it was really a nice design challenge as well. Probably a very different way, but it still suit Nobu as a brand, but then also looked like David Collins Studio as a brand. Not that we never have like a signature style. That's something that we're very, very careful of. All of our projects are about the brand, the location, the building. It's not about us, it's all about the client. But we do have a signature approach to the projects. Again, like how you feel when you're into the space, and again, colour, texture and detail.
So Nobu on Portman Square there was one on Berkeley Street that shut down, and then you did the Portman Square one. And the aesthetics are a lot different. So what was your approach? Was it the aesthetic straight away, or was it this, because it was like the Berkeley Street was in 2002,
I think.
Yeah, and this was
2020.
Yeah, so the technology had changed at that point.
Yeah.
So does the technology, as that change, ever lead the approach to it?
Never the approach in terms of how we want the restaurant to feel and operate. I mean, all of that kind of technology, and our approach to technology most of the time, whether that be lighting controls, audio visual, is to hide it, because it changes so often.
Yeah.
For instance, if we, like a TV, if we build the TV in, the TV changes a year down the road, we have to change the architecture. So it's always, our approach to technology is that the best way to use it is invisibly. You know what I mean? So then you don't have to change any infrastructure, and technology should add to the experience and not, you know, overwhelm the experience. That's what we try and approach.
Yeah, because it would easily date. And because you're known for your interiors last for 18 years or so?
Yeah, we did the study, and it was a typical hospitality project for us last 18 years, which is great, because that, you know, when we design those projects, we really look at, you know, using materials that are going to age nicely, you know, and almost improve with age. We've got a real commitment to quality and, you know, operational efficiency of both the space and the materials and furniture that we put in. So when we can, you know, present those stats, it's really like, it's a big achievement for us.
Nobu's not really as dark and as shadowy as your other hospitality space. So how do you create intimacy in a restaurant like that without...
Yeah, I mean, Nobu Portman Square it's very open. I mean, we've got the double height lobby, which has an entirely glass facade. The restaurant is glass facade on two sides. There's the lobby lounge downstairs, which again is all glass facade. So there's a lot of light coming in naturally. So rather than fight against that, we wanted to make those spaces feel very open and light and bright and connected to the exterior during the day. And then when obviously the sunlight goes down, we can make them feel a little bit more intimate with, again, playing with those lighting levels and things like that. That openness has been something that's been quite successful, because the lobby lounge cafe feels quite open, so a lot of local residents use it as a kind of a coffee shop for them, as well as hotel guests. That's been really successful for the hotel. But yeah, so we kind of don't fight against all that natural light in the day, but we introduce things like screens that can close windows in the evening, just because we don't want car headlights shining in all the time and things like that, and cars pulling into the hotel. So we create that intimacy by closing it off slightly. A lot of the spaces have timber screens that divide the space up as well. So you know, you might come into the restaurant and it feel like a big 200-seater canteen, but when you're sat down, actually, you know, the screens at a certain height create those kind of little moments of cocooning that makes it feel a little bit more intimate.
That's really cool. Okay, so David Collins is known for hospitality, but you're not just a hospitality designer. And moving on to something a little bit different was the Alexander McQueen stores, which I hear is really significant projects in your career, something fun and different. Can you tell us what was so special about it?
I think that we're lucky to work with a lot of kind of British heritage brands, and Not the McQueen is a very strong British brand that we've always admired for the, you know, their incredible level of creativity. So it was really amazing to be able to work with them, take them from the 4 stores they had up into a 50 store rollout globally. It's quite significant for me as well because my wife used to work for Alexander McQueen as well, so there's a nice kind of history there as well. But yeah, so I kind of led the concept on that with David Collins and then took it forward across all of the flagships that we did. We worked with the McQueen team in-house, and they had to develop their own in-house team that you did a lot of the shopping shops and smaller projects, but we were in charge of all of the flagships over the 6 years that we worked with them. So yeah, it was a really amazing, creative and collaborative process to come up with that concept. Yeah, and then we rolled it out worldwide, which was really good.
And each store has its own different design angle, like one in Japan's a bit more minimal, etc. So how do you have their own personality but then a consistency within that?
Well, that was like one of the key kind of briefs. We wanted to make sure that it had to look the same. It also had to look like an Alexander McQueen store if you took the branding away. That was always the test. If you took the branding away, could you tell it was a McQueen store rather than a Prada store or a Dior store? So what we did was we created these. Well, first of all, we did a lot of brand analysis, which was really useful because we did that with the McQueen team. Is like, what would be McQueen about our stores, you know? So we did lots of brand analysis where we looked at like the contradictions within the brand, like the hard versus the soft and the masculine versus the feminine and the dark versus the light. So we knew that that's what we wanted to kind of create in the store environments. We also couldn't reference one collection to, you know, one previous McQueen collection because, you know, the collections change, you know, so dramatically from season to season. So we had to kind of pick little elements to create this world of McQueen that kind of, you know, didn't reference anything too specific. So we created these traditional panels that, well, they look like traditional panels. Then when you got up close, they kind of start to reveal themselves and have like sea creatures and anemones and skulls and things like that. And then we created those in full height wax models, and then we cast them in plaster and used them around the store. So that gave us our consistency wherever we were. We actually created a silicone molds. So rather than shipping the panels around, we rolled up the silicone molds, shipped those, and then the plaster was cast locally. So that was our consistent element. But yeah, like in London, we had a 2-story store, so we could play with different elements. In Tokyo, McQueen wasn't really considered as a cool brand, so we made the store feel slightly younger and a little bit edgier. So it gave us that kind of tool to be able to play with it. As well as kind of rolling it out, we did manage to, you know, add unique elements for different locations, which is really good. And in terms of lighting there, we mixed like the furniture and lighting, both custom pieces and antiques. But the big thing in terms of lighting there was obviously architecturally, you know, we couldn't have too much decorative lighting, but these plaster panels that we made, we added this beautiful architectural lighting that just washed these plaster panels, which even made them even more dramatic. And again, that was some consistency that we had all over the stores.
So as well with the lighting, you have to think about it a lot differently. People need to be able to see the products.
Yeah.
And the atmosphere that I know in like your general high street stores, they really want people to spend. What's the sort of approach in a designer store with the lighting and create, what sort of atmosphere are you trying to create?
Well, it's I think if you think about the Bond Street Alexander McQueen store, it was a lot slower paced. And I think, you know, we did that with in terms of the materials that we used, much more carpet, you know, slightly plush, so physically a change of pace. But we found, and they also told us, the longer people spend in the stores, the more they were going to. The longer they spend in the stores, the more they spend in the stores. So we made it feel a little bit more residential. We kind of, you know, dimmed the architectural lighting and spotlit the product. So the product standard stood out a lot more. We really reduced the amount of ambient light in the stores to as much as we could, so you could obviously still made the product sing. So that made the stores feel a lot more comfortable. We had seating areas in each store, you know, drink stations and things like that. So that kind of more residential approach, which made you feel like a guest in the store, rather than a customer in the store was something that was really successful.
And those approaches that you have to like a store compared to like a hospitality space, but do you ever take what you've learned and take it into a completely different environment?
All the time.
Yeah?
We're lucky that we work across so many different sectors, in hospitality, hotels, restaurants, bars, retail, commercial, residential, private residential, boats, so everyone sits together in one big studio upstairs and, there's really kind of cross-pollination of ideas and materials and things like that. So, a custom finish that we might be designing for a residential project, which is, obviously has a residential price to it. We then, create more of a custom version we can use in our retail projects. And it becomes the same with lighting. An approach that we might take for retail might be used for the artwork in a private residential project, or the way that we've washed the walls with light in the Alexander McQueen stores, we might then start to do that in a hospitality project. So it's really nice that we get that cross-pollination across the sector.
So you mentioned maritime projects, which is stuff we're going to move on to, because that was like 2 years ago now.
2 years.
So I remember you talking to Sarah about that in Dark, and that was really a really interesting project to work on, because you've worked on hotels, but this is essentially like a hotel in motion, like moving, but you'll be working on it stationary, right? So how do you think about, what were you thinking with like lighting fixtures, what you choose, because it's going to move, and the stability of it all?
Yeah, that was one of the key things. Like it's a moving hotel, but it's almost a moving city. Like it's absolutely huge. But the ship is constantly vibrated by the engines, so you have to really think about how you're going to fix lighting and furniture to the ship itself, because if you screw anything in, slowly that screw is going to work itself out. So technically that was one of the issues that we had to overcome. But the thing with a cruise ship is that it's very much a captive audience for what could be days, weeks, months at a time. So that becomes their entire world. So we were very conscious that we take the Grand Lobby, for instance, in the evening. They might go there for a cocktail. So that's a lot of different uses over a single day. And how did we make that? We wanted to make that feel like different experiences, because very quickly they'll get tired of the same space. So lighting was a key tool that we used to make those spaces feel different. So in the morning it felt a lot brighter, and then in the evenings everything became a lot dimmer. So lighting controls specifically were really, really important. Also added complexity that obviously the ship's moving around constantly, so the timing, and one day it's sunsets at 6 p.m. and the next day sunsets at 9 p.m. as it's moving around. So it was really complex to kind of work that out. We also integrated a lot of lighting into things like the artwork. Again, in the Grand Lobby, which is a space which spans over 3 decks, there's a huge mural at the back which is made from folded metal and almost works like as you move around the space, the image starts to change. But we embedded lights behind that as well. So again, in the morning it was slightly brighter, and then it had it slowly changed colour. We're not into colour changing lights, but it slowly changed the warmer colours and stuff like that. So, when you pass through the lobby, even if you're passing through, it looked different all the time. So it kind of kept that level of interest for guests on board.
Stopping you from going mad.
Yeah,
like I said, there's not a real sense of night and day, so you had to really think about comfort over weeks on end.
Yeah.
So how did you figure out how to really nail?
I think it was just making sure that both from a lighting point of view and a design point of view, that each area that we designed on board had its own personality and feeling. I think some of the research that we did and some of the cruise ships that we visited, it was a lot of brown and beige everywhere, and you didn't really know where one venue ended and the next venue began. So we made sure that each venue had its own personality, its own feeling. So if you fancied something more energetic to sit, then you found that on board, or if you wanted somewhere relaxing or something that was, completely away from everywhere else, that you had that opportunity. So that's where we really worked hard to make sure that every space felt very different.
How did you choose the decorative features, again with it moving? If you had a big chandelier, would it just be like rattling glass?
Well, there was nothing could be hung on chains. It was all on rods. We couldn't have little crystal elements moving around. Everything had to be very rigid. So that was again a project.
Did you have a favourite part about that project?
I think my favourite is actually a space called the Britannia Dining Room, which is a 1,200 cover restaurant over 2 decks. So it's the biggest restaurant we've ever done. It was my favourite space because of the challenges that involved, and also kind of the design. We looked back at some of the Cunard archives and find this really nice timber marquetry from one of their ships from the 1920s, which was a story about the 4 wind gods, and that informed our concept for this space. And we had these 4 glass murals in the space of the 4 wind gods, and then all of the ceiling was all these organic shapes that meant to mimic winds, and we had sail-style drapery on the windows and things like that. So that was a really nice, conceptually a very nice space, and also obviously had its challenges with fitting that many covers in as well.
So the final project that we'll cover is the Wynn Palace Gourmet Pavilion.
Yep.
When was that completed?
It was completed late last year.
Yes,
late last year. Yes, it's one of our latest projects, an amazing milestone project for us. Yeah, so we're very
really,
proud.
I think it's a great one to finish off because the design, from what I was looking at, it looks like it's a design just built from light. It's so glowy, and I think it's a great example to see it where David Collins has got to with its lighting design, especially. Like, if we didn't talk about Harvey's, that's like pre your time, but that was like pre-LED era, used a lot of shadow. And then Connaught was the layered techniques, which you obviously can see in this one. McQueen is all about accuracy. And then Wynn Palace is like this total environmental sort of lighting. It's theatrical, but comforting at the same time, which is very hard to nail in lighting.
So we use lighting in a lot of different ways on that. We used it as almost as a navigation tool. So when you come into the space, you have the kind of the grand arrival, which is these beautiful kind of cast glass lit arches that bring you into the space. We used it for like drama. So when you go into some of the main food halls, you have these incredible gigantic chandeliers that we used, which are in collaboration with Lasfit. And then we use lighting throughout those seating areas at a very low level to create that level of intimacy, because it is a big space. So we used it, in a variety of different ways. But we discussed, obviously, during the concept stage with the client a lot, and one of the key words we used was analog in terms of the lighting approach, which was always in our minds as we were designing the pieces, and also when we were kind of scene setting the lighting. It needed to feel a little bit more analog. We didn't want to do, miles of LED strips around the architecture. We wanted to almost see the glow of the individual bulbs around the lights, and so that's kind of what we wanted to create. We didn't want to flood the space with light. We wanted to accent as many areas as we could. But yeah, that was a really nice approach that we took, and having that word analog in our head that we could always refer back to made sure that it kept that theme and the vision that we had from the start.
So you've got large chandeliers, backlit ceilings, lots of decorative lamps. So how do you stop that becoming visually overwhelming for the people in there?
I think it's that balance of when you come into the space, you have the impact of the large chandeliers. So you see the volume of the space, you see the volume of the chandeliers. It's that first kind of impressive, wow when you come into the space. But then again, what we do with a lot of our projects is, when you sit down as a more personal kind of scale, it's to bring the lighting down in scale and levels as well, to make that feel more intimate. No one wants to sit in an airport hangar eating in the dinner. So we needed to make sure that we balanced that, that impressive scale and then that personal level of intimacy. So when you're sat down at your table, your vision and your vistas of what you can see is reduced down, so it doesn't become too overwhelming when you're enjoying your dinner.
And you have quite a few bespoke lighting pieces in there.
Yeah.
When do you decide when an interior needs a bespoke piece rather than specifying one that already exists?
Most of our projects we start with bespoke. We'll add accent lamps, which we might specify, but most of the time, say we're thinking about what those lights are like really on in the process. So we've almost got an idea of what they are. If we try and find them to specify, we can't find them. So we've almost already designed them in our heads. So that also gives us the opportunity to bring in the materials that were going to be consistent throughout the project, correct scale, proportion, things like that. So the majority of the time it's going to be bespoke lighting, and I think the projects that we've talked about today all are bespoke lighting. Nobu Portman, for instance, that was all bespoke lighting, creating almost like street light style lamps that kind of guide you through the walkways around from the arrival through to reception. It would take us forever to find something that, so to design something's often quicker and easier and gets the result that we want.
That's one of the key ways you can spot a David Collins interior. So let's compare some of these projects to Wynn Palace. And so if we go back to Connaught Bar, and that's lots of layered lighting, similar, but I'd say it's a bit more controlled and restrained.
Yeah.
And Wynn Palace is a lot more expansive, theatrical. But at the end of the day, do they share?
They definitely share the same lighting principles. You know, when you talked about those different levels of lighting, you know, a more personal one, the architectural one, that mid-level lighting. They say that they share the same approach, but again, you know, very, very different spaces, different locations, and again, us not having a signature style, it's about how we approach the project from a brand, architecture, you know, customer and things like that. So our projects will have the same approach, but the projects do feel very, very different.
The McQueen store, as we were saying, your lighting products, it's slightly more technical.
Yeah.
In comparison, is designing a store compared to something like a hospitality place, what technically harder than the other? Or?
I think they have their own individual challenges. I think that you kind of approach them from a very different. One's more, well, they're both kind of experiences, but one's more of an experience. One's more of it's more about the product than anything else. So when we've done like jewelry stores, for instance, it becomes a little bit more technical because we have special lights that can change colour to make certain jewels look more attractive. You can use things like rotating LEDs and cabinetry to make jewels sparkle. So there's a little bit more technicality involved in the retail, I think. Whereas, you know, the hospitality, I guess we're also, again, looking for that candlelight effect, really.
So all these different projects, restaurants, shops, maritime, other than like the obvious, what have you learned over the time how people respond to atmosphere?
I think that you can be I think the feeling of a space is something that you remember. You can't just have one of those. You can have great service and great food and, you know, not one of our interiors, but a bad interior, and you know, you might not remember it. But I think it's a marriage of those three things, and but you'll always remember how you feel in the space, and you'll go back. So I think that's important, that, you know, it's something that people remember.
And you're a studio that works closely with lighting design studios.
Yep.
So in Wynn Palace, you've worked with Lighting Design International. Connaught, I think it was DPA.
Yep.
So working with these lighting design studios over the years, have those collaborations helped with your understanding of lighting, and what have you learned from them? Yeah,
it has. I think I guess lighting technology is always changing as well. So we work with lighting consultants because they've got, you know, knowledge of what's happening and new technologies, and they can suggest, you know, alternatives. We kind of always give them a brief of what we want, how we are looking to make the space feel, and, you know, what key lighting elements we want. But that technical aspect is something that we really, really value from them as well. And also working with people like DPA and LDI, especially on Wynn Palace, it's really nice that they creatively challenge us as well. You know, rather than just take our brief, they take it and they say, well, have you thought about this? Maybe we should suggest that. And again, it becomes a collaboration, and I think that's when you get the strongest results on a project, when they're as invested into the design and the overall experience that people are going to get from the projects as much as we are. I think like Gourmet Pavilion, for instance, I think with the awards it's won, you can tell that
it speaks for itself.
Yeah. So, you know, and that becomes across all projects, you know, the success of the project is the collaboration, whether it's collaboration between us, the lighting designer, the client, you know, the brand, you know, if everyone's collaborating together, I think that's when we get the most successful projects.
Mm-hmm. So as a company, 40 years, what a achievement. And we were saying earlier how you have such a long lifespan on your interiors. What would you say truly defines timeless design today?
I think as a studio, we never follow trends. And I think something that we stay true to, then that doesn't age our projects. I think with a lot of the projects that we do also, we look back before we take the design forward. So projects in Harrods, for instance, we'll always look back at their archive. The same with Cunard on Queen Anne, looking at their archive and looking for inspiration from their archive, which then gives the designs that we put in the space a little bit more authenticity, means that, you know, they don't look like an afterthought.
So 40 years. What do you think the key is to reaching such a milestone? And why do you keep employees such as yourself who've just stayed?
So I think for myself and a lot of people here, every project almost feels better than the last. Like this, we're obviously, you know, expanding into new sectors with maritime and hopefully more to come. And, you know, so every project seems more exciting than the last, and new challenges, and, you know, we're very lucky that the mix of projects, we have hotel projects that might be 4, 5, 6 years, but then a team might be also working on a retail project which is start to finish in 12 months. So there's always something creative within the teams. You know, we're not just delivering projects in the later stages. So we try and keep the studio as creative as possible, rather than becoming just a drawing office or anything like that. So I think that keeps us, that creativity is, I think, something that is part of, and that's part of our longevity and the amazing projects that we have. You know,
is there a sector you haven't done or tried, or are you waiting for that to appeal to you?
I think we'd like to do more travel, whether that be trains or airplanes, things like that. I think we'd love to expand into that, and and who knows? You know, the cruise ship came out of the blue, so you know, who knows what's around the corner.
Is that how to get you? Try and surprise you? You'll be like, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, I think so. But even like a cocktail bar in London excites us as much as a cruise ship and stuff like that. And it's that mix of projects across the studio that keeps everyone invested.
So for any young designers who want to break out in this industry, what would be your advice for them?
Oh, that is a good one. It changes all the time. I think gain as much experience as you can. I think the sooner you get into a studio, like a professional studio environment, very quickly you get an understanding of what that's like. I think for myself, like when I was studying, there's a very different pace to that compared to kind of a professional studio, which is a very, very deadline-driven business. I think that change in pace is sometimes quite a surprise. But I think that we've got, like here, new starters. It's getting as much experience as possible and really learning from your colleagues. I think here we've got a great kind of structure where we can mentor new designers and making sure that they've got support from above and below, and learning from each other is something that is really also quite important.
Some would then say, like, it's hard to get your foot in the door maybe sometimes, but I guess you're a great example of maybe just
sticking your
surprise
foot in the door.
them, stick you through the door.
Yeah, because everyone, and everyone's busy doing stuff, but you kind of, I think you might have to be a bit pushy. And then also here, I think when you do get your foot in the door, getting as much site experience as possible. Even that's just, shadowing meetings on site. You'll learn 1,000 abbreviations in the first 2 meetings, but you'll get a really understanding of how different consultants are coming at it as well, from a lighting consultant point of view, from M&E, audio visual, architecture, and that's really where, you can sit in a room and design something, but then understanding how that gets built and how everyone else has to feed it into the design process. I think that's also something that's really key to kind of get that experience as soon as you can.
I bet you get inspiration from all over, like books, travel and so forth, and I bet these young designers who probably look up to you if they're watching this might be interested to know what's inspiring you lately.
So travel's always inspiring, but what I've been going back to a lot quite recently is here in the studio we're lucky to have an amazing collection of auction catalogues. So like from Sotheby's and Christie's, that have these incredible collections of furniture, lighting, ceramics, art, and it's amazing photography that you don't get on Pinterest or anything like that. It's just an incredible archive. But the catalogues are all available online now as well. So you can go to Christie's website and you look at these amazing 20th century pieces. They're really inspiring, whether that be, a piece of ceramic that then you turn into, a table lamp, or a stool that you then turn into a vanity for a private apartment. They're really inspiring photos and a lot of details as well. So I think that's something that, is inspiring us a lot at the minute.
Would you ever use tools like Pinterest?
Yeah, we do it a lot, but we find that it kind of, it regurgitates itself a lot, and I think then, that's when you get everything looking the same. So we try and keep away from that as much as possible. It's good
for just like pinning things and making a mood board, really.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, we want to make sure that our projects, again, aren't trendy and don't look like anyone else's. We want to try and find those unique pieces and materials that no one else is. So
if we're sitting here in 10 years' time, 50th anniversary, what do you hope people will say about this chapter of David Collins?
So I think the scale of the projects continues to grow, and we're involved in much earlier parts of the process in terms of master planning, redevelopment of sometimes entire blocks. So that's something that we're very grateful of, that we, our projects continue to grow as the studio does. But a marker for us is that when we finish a project or finish a concept, that we look back and it's as good, and it sits in the portfolio comfortably with all the history of the projects. And so that's a real marker for us. So we want to continue that forward and make sure that every project is as good as, if not better than the last one.
Sure, well, I'm sure there'll be lots of jets and trains
Yeah,
in
hopefully.
this
Yeah,
next chapter. So yeah, thanks. That was awesome.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.